Well, good morning and welcome to this Rutland webinar, How Accountable is Accountability within the Golden Thread? This webinar will take around 39 minutes, and with us today, we are a panel, and we have got a panel of guest speakers, experts in fire safety and building safety. So advice given in this webinar is not intended to be legal advice, but rather ideas and thoughts of the speakers, and it's designed to steer you in the right direction, maybe spark new learnings, new ideas for you. So today's learning objectives will include: who is accountable? What are we accountable for? How accountability will be met? Who will enforce accountability and how enforceable will it be? How will accountability be enforced? How to train and resource accountability? Ideas of how to fund and budget for the maintenance of what's involved in the Golden Thread, and the importance of records and evidence. If we could all just take away one key action point that will help your organization, that will enhance life safety at every fire door, this webinar will have been well worthwhile. And that said, I want to give a shout out to promote the Fire Door Safety Week. So this year, we wanted to just give a shout out. As I've said, many will be aware that this week is the British Woodworking Federation's well-known Fire Door Safety Week campaign. It's been postponed a bit this year. And this year's campaign is being called Close the Door on Fire. It will now run from the 31st of October until the 4th of November. We can't emphasize enough the importance of the safety message around critical role that fire doors play in delaying fire and smoke spread. And we encourage best practice in specification and installation, and hopefully to stop the legacy of neglect in maintaining and inspecting fire doors. So there's a very important date approaching, 23rd of January 23. The new Fire Safety Act, whether we're ready for it or not, will take effect 23rd of January. It may sound a little way off, but that's only 82 days. So I just wondered at this point if we could just take a poll. Be really interested. If you've got a keyboard handy, please join in. It's really interesting to see how many of us actually feel ready for the Fire Safety Act coming into effect. Just give this a few seconds. All those risk assessments and fire door checks in place, etc. by 23rd of January. How ready are we? Just look at the results in a few seconds. So we have the results there. 19% feel completely ready. 60% have some work to do, but on track. 11% under-resourced, doubt we'll be ready. And only 9% confused about what we should be doing. So there's some good stats there. It's very encouraging. So just to introduce our panel of guest speakers today, we thank them very much for giving their time for this worthy cause. Maybe it looks like many of us have got a clear picture of what to do and where we're going. Plans in place, risk assessments underway as we head to this date. But I just want to introduce our panel today. We've Mr. Anthony Taylor. Anthony is the first of our speakers, and he's of Resolve Group, the interim chair of the Building Safety Alliance, and he's worked very much on one of the working groups. Good morning, Anthony.
Good morning, Neil, and thank you very much.
Next, we have Stephanie Lloyd-Fox of Magna Housing Group. Good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining. And last but not least, Sophie Westlake of North Seal. Good morning, Sophie.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you for joining our panel. Over to you, Anthony.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk to you the most of it about competence and how important that is under the new regime. And obviously, competence begats those who are all of those people who are accountable. Neil has spoken about the Fire Safety Act. I think you can see my cursor. This is a little infographic to explain that the Building Safety Act is also coming into play next year. Some of it has already come in. And that is where the accountable person sits. The accountable person is effectively the owner of a large residential building over 18 meters or 18 meters or 7 stories. The Fire Safety Act is where the responsible person sits. So there are two different, I mean, while they could be the same person, and no doubt in some cases they will be, they can and more likely to be separate people. So the importance of understanding the interaction of these is very important. Hence my concentration over the last few years has been trying to gear up the industry across the piece, with many others, I hasten to add, to competence. I mean, going back to the accountable person, or where there is more than one, the principal accountable person in a residential building, they're responsible to register the building. They've got to get, although there is a period of transition from the new build, where we've got existing buildings, in new builds, you cannot occupy a new build residential building, high-rise HRB, unless you have a building assessment certificate. That will incur building risk assessments and various other things. I'm not going to go into that detail today. But it also includes the safety case report, which will rely heavily on the golden thread, and the subsection of the golden thread being the safety case. The safety case and the safety case report being slightly different. They've also got to establish mandatory occurrence reporting to the regulator. They've got to have a complaint system, and they've got to, as you will all know, I've no doubt, got a residents engagement strategy. The accountable persons have also, in addition to all of that, got to keep prescribed information, which is the golden thread. It is a duty in law. So that answers our first question. It's the principal accountable person who is responsible and accountable for the golden thread, although many, many others will be contributing to it. Just to be absolutely clear, the Building Safety Act has 2 parts. Oh, sorry, it's got 5 parts. Part 3, the ones that concern us today, really, is all about new build and construction. And it obviously has, it also has increased requirements on people operating hospitals and care homes. And part 3, sorry, that's part 3. Part 4 is looking at the HRB 7-story, 18-meter residential buildings, and that is where it's anything which has more than 2 residential units. So I will carry on from there. So, oops, sorry, let me just get that right. I've now got a few slides. I've got a number of slides. I'm going to whiz through them because you're going to get them in a PDF after the event. But I've got a few here from their health and safety executive, who is the regulator here. They've created a new regulator called the Building Safety Regulator, and they are the ones who will be enforcing all of this. But they are very, very keen to increase competence across the whole piece. This goes from construction right the way through occupation, and obviously at the other end, at the end of the life cycle. This is going to be their approach. They want to ensure stakeholders know their competency requirements, and I'll come on to some of the ones that we've been dealing with up to date. They'll measure them. And they expect the accountable person and all their suppliers, which is the really salient point here, to be competent in that what they do. And a big focus has been to improve. It was picked up by Hackett in original reports, was the behaviors and the cultural change that's needed. You'll have heard a lot about cultural change. So the competence PASs and competence requirements include a lot about culture and behaviors. Again, I'll come on to that in a minute. There are creating, there is an interim industry competence committee at the moment, and they're creating a permanent one. And this is in place, and it sits within the building safety regulator to keep an eye, improve competence and promote it. And this is will be a long permanent committee amongst a couple of other committees that are there. So it just underlines the point of the importance of competence. Here, as I say, we're all very used to skills, knowledge and experience being tested that, and indeed testing our suppliers. The difference here is that we've added in, or not me particularly, but behaviors have been added in for an individual. And we're looking here for integrity as much as anything else, to understand where the limits of your competence are, start and finish, and have the understanding of where you might wish to go to ask for further advice or more expert opinion, and have the, it's a phrase I've used before, is that you need to have the competence to have the confidence to challenge some of the information you've been given. So what we've done is we've started with the BSI Flex 8670, and this is aimed at individuals as opposed to organizations, the focus now being on individuals very much being competent, rather than the assumption that an organization can prove that it is competent to undertake the thing. We need to know that the individuals within that organization are also competent. So we have the overarching framework, and then we've got 8671, 2 and 3 here. I've been working in all of those, but I was the lead industry lead on 8673 for those responsible for managing safety in residential buildings. Originally, we were looking at supporting the building safety manager, which is a role that was taken out of the bill. And when the Building Safety Act was put into place and got royal assent, there is no such role in law as a building safety manager any longer. However, I know full well, and I think it's a damn good idea, that an awful lot of, certainly in the public sector housing, social housing, a lot of local authorities and others are still employing and continue to employ people with the title building safety manager. The point of all of this really is that all that list of duties that I read out about the accountable person, he or she or the organization still has the responsibility to deliver on those duties in law, but they don't have a designated person to deal with it. So the idea of removing the building safety manager to give greater capability, greater opportunity to organizations to ensure they can get the competence to support their accountable person by making sure they find the competencies in and around their organization. Next one is, so this explains, we've got up here the 8670, which is an overarching framework. And the idea of that is to take it, each discipline within the built environment, to take that overarching framework and deliver it into their own professional trade body, organization, what have you, and to use that framework and map the competences of their personnel against this overarching framework. That concept has been taken into the principal design of the principal contractor, and as I say, 8673, this one, and more are being developed. These three have been published and are available for free from the BSI, and I would suggest you go and get them. The principal designer and the principal contractor obligations under the Building Safety Act are different and additional to those obligations under CDM. And fundamentally, it is their requirement of these people to make sure that the buildings that they design and erect are compliant with building regulations. So 8673, competency standards came into effect in July. The bit there I want to point out on this slide here is the minimum competence. All these PASs are looking at minimum competencies. They are the bottom line. So we're expecting people to look quite hard at what they do and make sure it is a legal obligation of an accountable person to make sure that the people they appoint are competent. And part of the behavioural and the cultural change is to make sure those that hold themselves out as competent do not take on work that they are not competent to do, if you're with me. So this is all part of this change of culture. That is the powers. You can see the contents there. I'm not going to go into it in detail. I want to give you a little oversight of some of the bits and pieces about it. So the main point about this was a discussion about whether the powers should provide guidance and competence for purely the new regulatory requirements under the Building Safety Act, Fire Safety Act, etc. We've agreed not to do that. So the PAS looks at holistic competence to manage residential buildings, and includes fire safety, structural safety, which are effectively the new bits in the, not all of it new, I hasten to add, within the Building Safety Act, but also public health and public safety, for which we've already got myriads of regulations. So they're all brought together in this document in order to make sure individuals do know what they need, and indeed the organizations that might hold themselves out as responsible for delivering, let us say, Part 4 duties or holistic safety of buildings and the people in them. The output of all of this is to have safe buildings and residents who are safe to live in them, as we must remember. And I would just point out the term person legally in both the Act and the powers, it is put out there. Person can mean an organization and an individual. It's just a legal term, but people can often read person as being an individual. It can be either and an organization or an individual person. The forward, this is the forward from a copy of the forward from it. And the point of it, the idea is it's used as a benchmark by accountable people and the regulator and various others and residents to see whether or not the people who are delivering building safety are competent to do so. So you can be judged against it, and no doubt it will be taken forward in courts as a document of which you can be judged against. And it covers, and you look at the highlighted bits at the bottom: design, planning, organization, resourcing, coordination, monitoring, controlling, reviewing, and the independencies between them, because none of those functions actually operate independently, do they? They all run on from one to the other. So it's been quite a complex thing to put together, but it's there, and I think it's been pretty well received. These are the various, this is the scope of it for those managing safety in residential buildings. You understand building structures and the systems. You'll recall, those who've had the pleasure of reading Dame Hackett's, we need to look at buildings as systems, rather like a Haynes Guide to Cars, of those of a generation about my age. So, you know, we need to understand the whole system, how it works together, the interaction of the systems and the components within, operational practices necessary to maintain, that's the sort of FM and so on. So risk management. Now, we all look at risk management, you know, and I come from a background of health and safety and business continuity. So risk management is something I've lived with for many years for the various hats I've worn, but some of this risk management is relatively new to the profession, particularly this concept of a safety case, which the guidance is coming out. So, however, and we've got leadership, communication, planning skills, personal commitment, and ethical behaviour and professional standards. Again, this is coming back to the cultural change and behaviours. This fundamentally underlines it. And these were paragraphs that we discussed with the regulator in planning this. A person managing safety shall adhere to the behaviours and ethical practices prescribed. Shall. Everyone understanding health and safety law, although these documents are voluntary, the word shall means that is a prerequisite. And the last sentence there, persons managing shall recognise the limits of their competence. Where the need for expert advice arises, people managing they shall be aware of the source. So the idea there is, if you don't know what you should be looking at, you go and get an expert, but then you need to understand what the standard is, or what the best practice manual, or whatever it is that they're dealing with. So you can challenge them, as I said. And that's really a very, very quick run through. But coming to the point of accountability, you can see that there are an awful lot of changes in culture. and one is going to be accountable for one's behaviour. One's going to be accountable for delivery of a much higher standard of work and a standard of data. We're talking particularly about the golden thread here. The amount of data that is being kept, it needs to be verifiable, it needs to be evidenced, and it needs to be true, and it needs to be updated. And it is the principal accountable person who is going to be accountable in law for it, but they will contract with many others to many other experts to help them put that together. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to some questions at the back. I hope that was of use.
Fantastic, Anthony. Thank you very much. You've packed so much into that compressed overview. It really was fantastic. Just picking out that word shall and explaining what that means in health and safety language is very helpful. And as you say, more can be gone into after this webinar. Please do put questions on the Q&A chat. Questions are coming in, which is fantastic, which we'll answer at the end. So I'd just like to introduce Stephanie.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So this morning, I'm going to be talking about some of the challenges and hopefully giving you some ideas about what you might be able to do to resolve some of those issues that we know we're facing across the sector. So some of the challenges, we know we've got a raft of new legislation coming, and in addition to that which has already been passed and that we're aware of, there's a raft of additional consultations going on at the moment. So whatever we're gearing up for now, we need to be thinking longer term as well. I mean, there's currently 12 ongoing consultations on the in-occupation regime for occupied high-risk buildings. There's also a consultation on fixed wiring testing and PAT testing for leaseholders, and that has the potential to extend into other areas as well. And of course, this is against a backdrop of really quite some significant resource pressures. We know net zero is on the radar for most of us. We've got an ever increasing number of disrepair claims and adverse publicity against the sector. Inflation's at double digits, and of course now we're looking at a potential rent cap or even a freeze has been talked about, which is going to knock tens if not hundreds of millions from everyone's 30-year business plans due to the compound effect. In addition to that, then we've got some real skills and competency gaps. I mean, Anthony was talking there about how important it is that we've got those skilled and competent people, and we know that there aren't enough of them. We've I'm sure all experiencing challenges in recruitment and gaps in competency and skills. And just for context, by 2040, a third of current construction workers in the UK will have retired. We had a 20% drop in apprenticeship take-up in COVID, and only 7% of the next generation of 16 to 18-year-olds are actually considering a career in construction and the built environment. And of course, we've also then got the retrofit and repair requirements, but that's competing with the new build arena as well. So for every 10,000 homes that we build, we do need 30,000 new additional recruits. And I don't know if you've seen recently, but the regulator have just put out adverts for 600 new roles. So clearly the enforcing bodies are gearing up. So we also need to be ready. So, I mean, that's some of the challenges that I think we're facing. How can we look at trying to meet our obligations under this backdrop of new regulation? Clearly, regulatory compliance is absolutely vital. I mean, it does mean that we need to invest in the right areas. And to do that, we really do need that good quality data more than we ever had before. Many of us may well not have even had information on the height of our buildings, or if we did, it might have been on a CD in a cupboard somewhere in archives, from when the property was built. And certainly in 80% of regulatory downgrades by our regulator in the housing sector, that's data deficiency is the primary reason for that. That data that we need, and by data I'm talking about real granular level information about all of the key components that we've got in our buildings. So we want to be having plans, we want real component level data. And I think when we think about the context of fire doors, we're talking about door tagging, and that it really needs to go down to that level of detail. But we need to ensure that we've got that data for effective planning and budgeting. We need to do that much more effectively than we ever have had to do in the past. And that means that we can then put the investment in the right place. In terms of data collection, it's worth considering who we've got going into our homes. So we've got an awful lot of people going out and about into our schemes, our homes, and we're carrying out stock condition surveys. We've got housing officers out there, gas engineers, electricians, caretakers, maintenance staff, external contractors, consultants. While they're there, that once up the garden path, can they actually collect some of that information for us? Do they know what they're looking for? Have they got the right data in front of them as well? And we need to use that data intelligently to see where our investment needs are and have a real joined up approach. I mean, retrofit and repairs need to very much be part of our consideration here. And we're fitting more new technology into our schemes, and we need to know exactly where that is and how that links in with other components within the building. And technology can absolutely help us in this. So we've now got self-testing emergency lights, which frees up resource from our caretakers or maintenance staff going out to test those. That then enables us to free up some of that resource to do other things, or maybe use that money to recruit other people that we might need to meet our obligations under the new regime. I mean, there's amazing technology in terms of access controls now, so we can see who has gone in and out of our buildings, who's left doors open, if we've got any issues with housing management, 20 people going into a property, what's going on there, nobody's left their home for a week, and we then know what those risks are. So we got arson risk because doors have been left ajar. We've got smart link smoke detection now, also doing fire and environmental, so we can monitor that remotely from our desktop. We don't need to send people out, and of course the more that we can do through data, that saves on that valuable people resource, but we may well need a different skill set for that. We've got smart door closers are coming, which will tell us more information and feed that back about doors. We've got door tagging. Most people now are looking at either QR or RFID tagging, which really you can just scan the door and it tells you every aspect of maintenance, every component that's on that door. And of course that's vital for the golden thread. And then of course we've got to think about the premises information boxes and how we share that with the fire service. So data is absolutely key for this. When we're out there as well, I think one thing that I've done at Magda is been really key to get those building plans drawn up, not just for our over 18 metres or over 11 metres, but thinking about all properties as well and collecting that information. So really, cultural change, I mean, we've seen it. The Hackett report was incredibly damning of the sector. We're disjointed. There's been a lack of ownership in our procurement. There's a race to the bottom. Value for money very often means the cheapest. And of course, it's very difficult to legislate for cultural change. That has to come from us driving that. And I think any of us that are on the receiving end of what should have been a really good set of Regulation 38 information will be well aware that doesn't always happen in practice. And clearly there's an absolute need for us to all ensure that we've got those processes and systems in place to make sure that from asset creation right through to disposal, we're capturing all of that information, and that's just at the heart of our organisational culture. There's a piece about accountability in our supply chain as well. We do need to hold contractors and our partners to account for when they're not potentially performing as we want them to be. And certainly in the Southwest, there's been a huge amount of work that's gone on to that with the Homes for Southwest. But I mean, some shocking statistics: out of the 4,500 properties that have been checked in new build, 75% failed to meet the standards that were in place at the time of construction, and that's not even the new standards. So I think building compartmentation surveys is absolutely going to be key. We need to think about procurement. We need to be writing our contract and our specifications so that we're ensuring that everybody is very, very clear on their role, their responsibility. So we talk about an accountable person or the organisation, but we all have responsibilities, right down to people doing data entry, going out doing stock condition surveys, our contractors on site, and whether or not they're directly involved in the building safety arena. Building and quality checks as well is going to be really, really key for our new build. So photographic evidence, and also this applies to retrofit of any remedial work. You want photographs, you want records of fire stopping behind doors, for example. And then, of course, to do all of this, we're going to need to train and develop our people. We know there aren't enough of them, and the people we have got might not have the requisite skills that we need. So we've suffered from disjointed teams. Procurement's often been separate from development, asset, building safety, compliance. We've very much worked in silos. I think one key takeaway could be to look at the Building Safety of the Future Charter, which they will come in and do a full audit right across the organisation to help identify those underlying cultural issues, and that can help with change. There's also a piece around upskilling existing staff, and we need to be driving those right behaviours. So competency and experience are vital, but integrity, behaviour and values. So it's much easier to teach skills than it is behaviours. So are there people within the sector or your organisation that you think actually they're demonstrating the right behaviours? And certainly I've been really keen to promote that within my organisation and make sure that we're singling those people out and giving them the training that they need to upskill them. And finally, just some key takeaways here, really. It's about safety, not just compliance. So just one example here. You can be compliant by ensuring you've got a smoke detector on every level, or you've got fire doors fitted or something like that. But actually, you know, if you go back to the smoke detection, you might have it on the ceiling, you might tick a box, but does it work? You know, are we testing it? So that's what's going to actually make a difference in safety, isn't it? So we need to think about not just box ticking here. We need to think about actually keeping people safe, because ultimately that is the purpose of the Act, is to put people at the heart of our approach. The social housing white paper mandates that we consult and engage with our residents on matters affecting their safety. So we need to think about that messaging. And if you're old or disabled or in fuel poverty, you are more likely to die in a fire. So I think we need to think about that height versus risk approach. Just because you live in a building over 18 metres doesn't necessarily mean you are more likely or more at risk. So we need to be using that data on our demographics and our risks. Certainly when you go back to technology, there's a huge amount of software out there that if you haven't looked at it, I'd encourage you to do so. That can help you with building the safety case and look at traffic lighting, all of those key compliance areas, so that you can build up a more appropriate picture of risk and ensure that we are putting people first here. So that was just a very quick run through with my thoughts, hopefully a few things there for you to take away from today.
Thank you, Stephanie. I really like what you said about driving right behaviours and teaching skills, and the way you've been promoting this at Magna Housing. And just a quick reminder for attendees to keep putting questions on the Q&A chat, and I'll now hand over to Sophie Westlake of North Seal.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. So we've heard Stephanie and Anthony talk about the competency and who is responsible at each stage. And just bringing this back from a supply point of view, the fire door, there's 3 golden rules of fire doors. They must be manufactured correctly, installed correctly, and maintained correctly. And the golden thread of the fire doors starts at that manufacturing point. So with the cradle and the birth of these doors. And this golden thread must be tracked from that starting point. As Stephanie mentioned, there's lots of door tracking systems out there, and getting it at the point of manufacture allows you to follow that door and the door lifespan through its life cycle. It's almost like a VIN number on a car. So you can track that door and all of the component parts that are producing that door through its life cycle. And each person at each point is responsible. So the manufacturer is responsible, the installer is responsible, and also the asset owner is responsible to ensure that door is maintained. So we know what it looks like when it goes wrong, but what does it look like when it goes right? So this is a video of an Ibis hotel in southern England. You can see there that the corridor is ravaged by fire, but the hotel bedrooms are not, because the seals have been fitted correctly and installed correctly, and the doors have been maintained to do the function as designed. But constantly at each point, you are bringing that door back to the fire test evidence. Fire tests are rigorous tests. We over test at each point. So a test will burn the door until it disintegrates, so we can know how long that door is going to last in a fire situation to ensure that life and the property is maintained to the best. So this particular hotel had less downtime because the rooms were protected, and the corridors you can see were damaged, but that would take less time to bring back up to code and ensure that those doors were all checked again. So as you can see on screen, the FDIS Fire Door Inspection Survey carried out their annual survey and still found that 75% of doors did not meet the required standard. This is down 1% from 2019, but it's still not good enough. Making sure that the doors are meeting their manufacturing standards and being installed correctly is key. We can see there that 31% of the doors failed due to poor installation. So having apps following the life cycle of the door and the golden thread of its manufacture are key to getting these right. The door can be installed and signed off correctly, and knowing that when you come to that maintenance point, if there's gaps that are an issue or the ironmongery isn't performing as designed, then those will come to light and any issues with the doors can be rectified at that point. So following through a door app or the technology to trace that door, you can see that maintenance time and downtime can be reduced because not all seals perform in the same way. When you're looking at the intumescent seals on a door, you need to take into consideration that the whole door has been tested as a solution. So if one particular seal has come loose or fallen out or been removed, then that needs to be replaced and the integrity of the door needs to be remade. So that might include replacing a seal, replacing a door closer if it's not performing correctly, checking the gaps, but not all graphite seals perform in the same way, or not all sodium silicate seals perform in the same way. So you would always, as a fire door inspector or installer, refer back to that test evidence. Having a chip on the door that you can trace enables you to get that information quicker than going through the traditional sources of looking at the door manufacturer and following that process. So ensuring that you're making that door back to its manufactured state is vital, because it will then perform how it's designed to perform. And a fire door is a vital engineered part of the building and the fire safety program designed for that building. You must also replace like for like. So if you have graphite around the perimeter of the door, you must replace it with exactly the same manufacturer's seal. You can, obviously, looking at test evidence, you could replace all 3 perimeter seals for sodium silicate if it's included in the fire test evidence, but you must always refer back to that fire test evidence, and knowing these competencies is vital. So if you are struggling to understand what is required, or you always seek out advice. Us as a supplier, we offer advice, we offer CPD, so we're always there to support the building construction industry. So if people do need advice on what seals are required, then we're always there to assist. And knowing your understanding of the requirements is part of the battle. You don't know what you don't know. So understanding that is key. Again, if you're looking at an air transfer grills, many need replaced because they become damaged or cover plates fall off, depending on how the door is used. So these again must be fitted in the same way as it was initially installed in the door. Some may have a requirement for a liner, some may require no liner, depending on the air transfer grill. But if it did require new liner, then that might require that door going back to the factory, because it might require a hardwood liner, cutting a wider aperture out of the door to fit that liner in. And also remembering the integrity of the door. You wouldn't fit an FD30 air transfer grill into an FD60 door. You need to remember all the component parts, and apps such as the Inspect app allows you to get access to that information quicker. So therefore, your maintenance teams can be on site quicker to replace these products. And for big organizations such as hospitals and care homes, it allows you to track the entirety of your door stock. So you can check that online and double check every status, whether the doors are compliant or whether they need some adjustments to make them compliant. So having that trackable evidence from cradle to grave is vital, and it also cuts down on maintenance time, ordering time. Having that ability to see what status each door is at the click of a button is vital when we are resource scarce with both staff and financially. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope you found that useful, and pass back to Neil for questions.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Sophie, sorry. That video you showed us was absolutely graphic. Sophie, how effective every fire door should be in protecting life safety, and also what you said about knowing our competencies is very key. So yeah, just to move on to the Q&A session, we've got a lot of questions coming through, which is fantastic. And maybe just start with this one: how accountable will staff be inside a merchant? I think this is a fire door inspector asked this question. Yeah. How accountable will staff be inside a merchant who sell both fire doors and hardware to make a door assembly? Is responsibility being put back on the branch or merchant for recommending fire safety products? It's a bit of a one for a hardware supplier.
Neil, could I suggest a bit there?
Yeah, go.
It's Anthony here.
Thank you, Anthony.
There's a lot of focus on the procurement side, which is effectively where this is coming from.
Yeah.
And I think I will send you a white paper that's come out. It's about the competence of procurement, and how effectively the staff who are supplying this will be expected to understand within bands of, so if you're an A+ person, you should be talking to an A+ person on the other side. So you're talking at the same level of competence. So the answer is it's getting better, but of course there is a lot of work to do in that. Yeah. So whether they're accountable or not, it's really down to the designer and the person who's procuring it to make sure that what they're procuring is facilitated by the design that they're trying to get to. So it's getting better, but if I send you this document, that might help inform that particular question.
That's good, and we can send that out with the resources afterwards. Thank you, Anthony. I think is Kelvin Hughes on the call as well on this question from Sparker. Do you want to just?
Hello, Neil. Yeah, I'm on the call.
To what Anthony's just said.
Yes, okay. It's an interesting question. So I guess is particularly when a merchant's selling a fire door and the hardware. So some retailers or merchants sell just hardware, or some people sell just doors. I guess when you think about selling a fire door and hardware to make a fire door assembly,
yeah,
I guess there's a shift then. So responsibility then getting, so the builders come in, responsibility then getting shifted back towards the branch or depot, and the responsibility getting shifted back, and the tradespeople effectively saying, what do you recommend? What's going to make me compliant? So yes, it's an area of concern massively, I guess, from what we're seeing across the country. I guess the key thing what we're finding with some forward-looking merchants is they're actually reviewing their fire door testing and certification, and they're also reviewing their fire door hardware testing and certification at the same time.
Okay.
So when they actually, when they're actually recommending doors and hardware, it's actually a compliant and compatible solution. Hope that gives some thoughts to the question.
Yeah, that's good. So they're like working in harmony. And it would link on with what Anthony said as well about the principal designer, that they've got options in the merchant that they can specify that are compliant.
Yes, good. I think the key thing is really to make it simple enough so it's it is easy to recommend. The technical aspects being done by somebody in the technical team, if you like, or technical expertise is being consulted. So therefore, when it's put down to someone further down the chain.
That's very good.
So
there's another one here. It's potentially for Anthony again. Would a hospital be classed as a type of residential accommodation? Can you take that, Anthony?
I can. Yeah, I mean, as a supplementary to that question is how do we ascertain our competence? If I deal with that first, I would suggest that the first port of call, it's a bit of a complex question because a hospital is a very complex area. So competence in the people managing it, managing the compliance, managing the behaviours, managing the culture is all terribly important to all of this. I would point them firstly to the PAS 8673, which is aimed at an organisation, but the organisation can have access to all these competencies in their existing people or their suppliers or a combination of both. But the PAS expects and requires that there is a senior manager, a senior director perhaps, who is the individual who himself or herself is competent to understand what's going on below them, because you can't manage people if you don't understand what it is you're managing effectively. So the simple answer is go to the PAS. I would say that I can't go into huge depth. If you would pass these people the questioner my email and they wish to get in touch with me, then please do. Is a hospital a residential building? The hospitals at the moment come under Part 3 of the Building Safety Act, which is mainly relevant to new build. They are not effectively part of the Part 4, which is occupied residential buildings. One might expect them to come into that category at a later date, but I would say probably not for 5 or even possibly 10 years. But the Part 3 area is focusing on them getting much more detail around the data and the information that the other two, Sophie and Stephanie have spoken about. So particularly the Reg 38 information and managing the maintenance of all the equipment and all the stuff that is necessary to operate a hospital. I hope that partially answers the question. But the focus of a hospital under the new regime at the moment is into Part 3.
Thank you for pointing that direction, Anthony. It's a very clear answer. Thank you. So another question here from Chris. Should electronic records of each element of installation, such as door set, be mandated? There are many systems that permit such records being generated and removes the requirement for hard copies. That not only improves record keeping, but also sustainability. Don't know who wants to take that question. That'd be one for you, Sophie. Anthony, go.
Well, I can again, I can partially say we there's as I think Stephanie mentioned, there has been a lot of consultation about the secondary legislations coming, mainly around the golden thread. One of the things we have requested the regulator do is mandate a filing structure and a coding system, so that when we're swapping data or people are providing data into the golden thread or the safety case, that it all fits in the same hole, for a better expression.
Very
At
interesting.
the moment, they've said that they're not going to do that, and they point us towards the BIM framework. But
Okay.
the Building Safety Alliance is doing a lot of work with the regulator and various other stakeholders in this space. So if the regulator doesn't, we are hoping that industry will.
Yeah.
But as you might appreciate, that is quite a task.
Yep. That's helpful. Anything to add to that, Stephanie or Sophie?
Yeah, I mean, I would fully support that. As Anthony said, I think it makes a lot of sense. It ensures that we've got that compatibility of data then, and that we're all doing a similar thing. And I think, you know, we do see buildings passing between owners. So one association or somebody might go and build something, and they might know exactly where everything is and where that information is. But how do we ensure that transfer of information from one owner to another? So I think ensuring that we have that filing structure and some kind of consistency in data capture and collection across the sector is certainly something I would welcome. Whether it will end up being mandated or not is a question still to be answered, clearly.
That's good. Yeah, thanks for that question, Chris. Hope that answers it. Another one for you, Stephanie. Simon has said, you mentioned about which documents did you, or you said, which documents did you say were relevant for developing risk and building safety case?
Yes, well, quite a lot of them really. So I think you need to be looking at all of your compliance areas. So bear in mind, of course, the Building Safety Act applies to the whole building, including the structure. So we're not just talking about fire safety. So you're probably going to want plans of buildings, any structural surveys, details of the facade, the construction build-up, compartmentation surveys, you know, gas checks, electric tests, asbestos data, door surveys, details of alarm systems that you've got in there. I think you're going to want to look at every building on a case-by-case basis and determine what information is specifically relevant. What is out there, though, is there are a number of really good software packages that can do an element of that for you, certainly when it comes to key compliance data, so that you can actually just click on building by building and see whether you're sort of a RAG status, really red, amber, green on that. And that's certainly what we're exploring at the moment. And the benefit of that, of course, is that you start to overlay some of that information. So if you've got a high number of people, and of course we need to bring into that some of the housing management data about occupancy levels and types of risk as well. So if you think, you know, about a building, okay, you might be compliant in a number of areas, but actually, if you've got one gas check overdue and somebody else has got something else going on, and you've got antisocial behaviour issues and doors are being kicked in, and you've got an arson risk, and there's a raft of other things going on, suddenly that building becomes a lot higher risk, even though perhaps if we were traditionally working in silos, we might think, oh yeah, well, we're compliant on this and we're compliant on that. So I think really you need to be looking at a system and your processes and data capture that allows you to intelligently work with that information to build up a case for each individual scheme.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's very good. And just the next question says, are there any plans for the tracking systems to be universal? Now, if I understand the question, universal being that it doesn't just apply to fire doors, for example. It is a question I've had in the past. So this question from Dennis about our tracking systems, is there any plans for them to be universal so that it would apply to sort of pipe collars and other building safety parts of a building, if I've got Dennis's question right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to come on that and perhaps hand over to Sophie, who's looking like she's eager to answer that question. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly when you think about compartmentation, certainly in retrofit now, it's quite common to see QR codes used, and that
Right.
component level data. So, I mean, when we think about new build, it's somewhat easier in some respects because you can have that BIM model that applies. When we're thinking about retrofitting and going back to do work, it's much harder then to track everything that's happened in that building. Now, it will depend on the system and the processes you've got in place to ensure that happens. And it does come back to competency training, you know, so that our plumbers, our electricians know not to drill holes through compartment walls. But where you are then having to go and do remediation work because you've had a compartmentation survey carried out, you want to be overlaying that information either onto your plans, capturing that in your system, or ensuring that we've got, you know, a QR code so that if anybody's going there, that we can see exactly what's been done. Again, it's similar to the answer to the previous question, really, in that I don't think there is a standardisation of that at the moment, but clearly that is something I think that would be very welcome by the sector. I don't know, Sophie, if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, so there is systems in place for tracking fire stopping, as well as the fire door, obviously using the QR codes. In part, the industry needs to drive this by, and then perhaps the government will follow with making this mandatory. If you are using this system and, you know, door trackers, fire stopping trackers for both new build and retrofit, you've got that traceability of what is going in that door, making, you know, repairing those doors or repairing the fire stopping, or knowing which industry you need to get in to do a repair. It gives you that flexibility, it gives you that advantage point for resources. So it's key to sort of the industry to adopt it before it's made mandatory, and then hopefully the government will follow on. But there are various schemes for various areas within the industry. Hotels use them a lot to do mandatory security checks. So it's just the same system being applied to different industries.
Yeah, no, it's very helpful. Thank you both for your answer on that. There's a lot of questions. I realise that we did say 39 minutes, but there's still 90, well, it's dropped a bit, 86 people still on the call. There are some very good questions coming through. If we could just answer these. So yeah, on the tracking system, are there any, what is the view on where the golden thread of information should start? So I suppose it's not related to the tracking system, but I've often thought about it with fire doors, for example. Should it really start at the surveying stage, or does it start with the manufacturer? The fire door surveyor needs to really get a lot of detail down about the building, what type of building, what building regs apply, the size of the aperture, the material of the building. There's a lot of competency required at surveying level, but I'd be glad of what the panel think on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in on that, Neil. And I think perhaps Anthony's got something to share on that as well. I think, again, it depends whether you're looking at new build. So it is somewhat easier there, because the new build element, it starts at design stage, doesn't it? So, or even concept stage. So that is the point at which I think you want to get everybody around the table and start looking. And this comes back to having that cultural piece, doesn't it? And making sure we've got, excuse me, a joined up approach. So we've got our development teams engaging with our asset teams, engaging with our maintenance teams to think about, well, what actually are going to be our requirements to maintain this building? How do we make it safe? So I think if you think about new build, it starts at conception stage.
Yes, about the principal design,
absolutely, but it's a bit easier to track through there. But I think when you're thinking about existing in occupation buildings, what you're really doing is it's pulling all of that information together. So, well, where does it start? Well, it's almost everywhere, isn't it? You need information on your doors. You also need information on your, you know, the design of the building. You need your compartmentation survey. So it's about really looking at the principles that are laid out in the safety case, and then going off to find that information to meet those requirements. The golden thread then going forward is about how you maintain your building, how you keep those records up to date, how you ensure that anybody that's going to work in that building, live in that building, or do anything to that building knows all of the information that they need to know to ensure that it's maintained and safe.
That's very good. Thank you. Just going back, sorry, to Dennis's question. When he said universal, he was talking of fire door inspector will need potentially hundreds of different apps to be able to inspect doors. And will there be costs involved in using all the apps? Is this an industry thing that needs looking at before?
Yeah, I think it is. I think there are so many solutions out there, technological solutions to this. I mean, there are any number of apps that you can use now for door surveying, and it depends what you do with that. So, do you want just a system that has got that can have a QR code and RFID tag, so that when you go there, you scan it and you've got that information? But more importantly, how does that then link back into your housing management, your asset database? Is that held separately through a portal? And I think those are all questions that each organisation we need to look at. You can certainly do it with one system. There are systems out there that do that, but you might then also like to think about, do you put other compliance information through that system as well, so that you've got data capture being done through one system? And inevitably there will be costs associated with that. Well, that will depend on your appetite really and your requirements for that. And I did see another question on there earlier as well, in terms of that you know, do we have control of the data? Somebody asked about that, and again, I think when you're procuring a system and looking at all of the different solutions that are out there, that's a really key question that you need to be thinking about. Do you need to have control of that data? Are you happy for it to be cloud-based and owned by someone else, or do you want to buy an on-premise solution or build your own? Does it need to integrate with your system? How's that stored? Is your system actually appropriate to hold this additional level of information? Because the last thing you want is people using loads of different apps and systems to get all of the information about a building that needs to really be in one place.
Yeah, no, and the whole thing about this is we want to make it easy for the accountable person. So there's one addressed to yourself, Anthony. Door manufacturers are using cascaded evidence, saying we need to find a better way to offer fire certification evidence, as currently they issue 500+ page documents. These are huge field of application reports, which people are trying to read and understand, possibly beyond their competency levels even. Would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would. In my career, I've seen many health and safety files, and I would use those as an illustration of a lot of useless information just being given to you in order to supposedly satisfy a legal requirement. Yeah. I would suggest that, sorry, I'm just trying to get the thing so the sun's not shining on it. The best answer I think I can give is the matter of specifying what you want from your suppliers and being very, very cruel about it, frankly, because there's one of the issues that's been, mentioned by the other speakers is the quantity of information and the verifying the correct information, the necessary information. And you as an accountable person, or the person responsible for the golden thread, does not want a mass of information that is irrelevant.
Yeah.
So the very best way of doing it is just saying, no, that's not right. I want the right stuff. And I would say, if you're not getting it, then either change your supplier, or if you're really not getting it, and it sounds simplistic, is just complain about it to the regulator, because that's what they are very keen on getting, is the right information, which is current and verifiable. So one of the issues that I think is coming up is the necessity or the likelihood for people to have people who understand and can verify data, as opposed to just being punched into machines, because we've all seen what happens when that can go wrong. Yeah,
that's good. Thank you. There's a question here from Adam. Do we see a shift in procurement routes to avoid non-compatibility of doors and ironmongery? This needs to come from the designers and architects, who all have their preferred ironmongery they want to use. I don't know whether, is that one for you, Sophie, or you deal a bit with?
We deal with ironmongers and architects. So education is key to getting the design stage correct. So we work with architects on CPD and getting them to understand, you know, the responsibilities of designing these doors. So it you know, understanding, and again it comes back to the fire test evidence, understanding what is required on the door and what is compatible comes back to that.
Yeah.
You know, understanding that document. And yes, some of the field of applications are 500 pages long, and that's because the manufacturers are testing multiple options so that designers have got choices.
That's good. That's brilliant. Thank you, Sophie. Just a couple more. Question from Neil. Good morning. What material should be used to carry out repairs on fire doors? Presume this is from maybe a fire door inspector. Large chips on the edges of these doors or frames. I'll maybe just take that. I think again it comes down to competency, and combined with that, door manufacturers should, in my opinion, produce a document that defines what are minor repairs and repairable, and detrimental repairs that are not repairable, and actually produce a document online and supplied with to fire door inspectors, because they've tested their doors, had them tested, and they know what will and won't pass a fire test. Some damage to doors is irreparable and affects the integrity for both fire and security and smoke. I hope that answers your question on that one. Yeah, there's a lot more questions. Don't know whether we just take one more. The Competition Commission would argue there needs to be options available for door set tracking software. Having one would cause a monopoly and only drive prices up. Would you have any comment on that, Anthony? It's a kind of an independent.
I think the issue, it comes back to my earlier comment, is if we can mandate how the format and the filing system and coding this information in a common format, then it shouldn't matter which system you use. It should be able to apply, but I mean, that's something, as I say, that we've recommended that this be mandated. It would have to be developed yet, but I don't think the regulator is going to be doing it. There are going to be costs involved in this.
Yeah.
And it's the compatibility is going to drive the costs down, and we put that point to them. And if the regulator won't, then industry's got to pull together and do it. And we're working with others to try and do that.
That's very, very interesting. Well, I think there are more questions, but we will answer those post-event. I realise there's still a lot of attendees on the call. Just say a massive thank you for all attending. We will be sending out a PDF, and recording will be on our events page, but just some key takeaways. Seek out and employ advice early from advisors. There are many advisors, such as the Building Safety Alliance and other competent professionals in the in fire safety. Second takeaway, budget for and fund your golden thread compliance, and find new networking partners within your sector who have ideas and what is working on funding. So don't be put off in the funding thing. The golden thread includes information from design through to installation, maintenance and inspection. So don't miss that maintenance and inspection bit, and make sure fire doors are an essential, and hardware are compatible and compliant, third-party certificated. It's a massive plus point having that UCAS accredited third-party certification. It means that someone outside third party is auditing. And fourth key takeaway, fifth key takeaway, competence will be checked and checked in detail subsequent to any incident. So competency, it's a massive thing. Recommend that if you haven't already, start a competency matrix and start upskilling and getting as much training as possible, and look out for the competency documents, which we will send round after this. Just a final call out for the fire door safety week, close the door on fire. Just to emphasize again the importance of the critical role fire doors play and in protecting life within buildings. We're very, very passionate about that. So I'd just like to thank you all for joining and have a good day.